Hey everyone, today I am going to be doing a bit of a review for the seasonal relics for the Season 1 Endgame revamp. I created a bit of an altered save so that way I could purchase a bunch of them and play around with them and kind of get a feel for them. Some of them I have a more in-depth experience than others, so just up front, my take on some of these may not have a full grasp on them. So if you have any sort of differing experience with some of them, please go ahead and let me know. I'm curious to see how some of these may have worked differently for you than for me. I did my best to at least get a basic understanding of them so I would be able to give, educated takes on them for anyone that's interested or curious and, wanting some insight on into which of these relics they should buy because you will not be able to buy all of them. You can get a good amount of souls naturally and normally without doing any sort of save editing stuff and kind of cheating your game, but you will not be able to get all of them. So, as I mentioned earlier, I did do some save editing and stuff, cheated myself some souls so I can mess around with the different toys. And this save state is just basically before I did all of that. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and get into the relics, the stuff that I'm sure you're actually interested in. Beginning with the weapons, we'll do the one-handed weapons first. Sign of the Soul Blade. Melee basic attacks have X% chance to repeat against the same target. This goes up with the more shards you get from the spires. Plus additional plus 12 damage against units larger than one tile. 15% chance to deal double damage. Gain 1 AP for the first kill each turn. And plus 7 damage for melee basic attacks. Now, if you're looking for a more damage-oriented option for your defender, this isn't a bad one, but to me, both of them really read much more as Vanguard-based weapons because you're generally not going to be looking for a whole lot of damage dealing with your defenders. They just can never really get that high. With a couple exceptions, something like Red Knight or maybe Gawain could probably use some of these to some decent capability. But I really like this one, the extra percent chance to repeat the attack against the same target, basically just a double damage but a little bit better because it's an entire second attack, which then in turn would have that double damage percentile chance on it, so potentially like triple damage even. This has really high damage capability basically. There's some RNG to it. The percent chance doesn't get very high, it's 1% per shard, so you will never get a really crazy number on it. But with Vanguards, I know some people like to put that Essence of Extermination on them for the 10% double damage chance. So with this weapon, that's 25% chance, 1 in 4. That's really not bad. So if you want a really sort of roulette style, really high roll based weapon, this is the one I think you're going to want to go with. The second one, the Soulthorn Mark. This one is definitely not going to have as high of a damage ceiling, but a bit more consistency to it. The effect for this one is soul fragments picked up by the hero grant each other ally plus 1 AP. Now, this one is just a bit of utility and something I kind of like, because when you pick up soul fragments, whoever picks it up, their AP gets zeroed out. Now, if you use an ability to grant AP after that, they will get the AP and can continue doing things. But this does put a pretty big stop to whatever hero's turn it is. However, Vanguards can pick up soul fragments in stealth and remain hidden, so they will not be at risk of being attacked, whereas some other heroes, you may have to move them out of position to pick up these soul fragments. Vanguards are very safe for this. So by using them as your collector, you can grant AP to your other party members and enable some of them to continue beating down on the Fomorians. Wild Magic effect, 50% weapon damage to all enemies. This is a Wild Magic 10, so you're definitely going to want a more spell-based party if you're using this one. And 50% weapon damage, again, for a one-handed sword, not great, but Vanguards do have some good buffs to their damage, so this will actually end up to being a decent amount of damage, but nothing super crazy. Strikes applying poison, so this can save you a skill point, plus 2 movement AP and 5% armor breaking. I think the armor breaking is kind of an understated element here because normally only champions get some armor breaking, so this can help your Vanguards a bit if they're your solo damage dealer. And then of course movement AP, Vanguards don't really struggle that much with this, but this is really good. Overall, both weapons are great. There are some really good one-handed weapons already, especially for vanguards, that I think may be a bit better for more consistent damage dealing, because it'll have bonuses to things like backstab or surprise attack. But the roulette nature of the Soul Blade is pretty nuts. Going into the two-handed weapons, your champion weapons, just up front, I don't think either of these are exactly great, but they're not bad either. For the Winged Avenger's sign, melee basic attacks deal 0% extra weapon damage to enemies adjacent to the main target. So basically giving a bit more AoE to your champion. And that's pretty good because, if you're hitting your main target, there's a chance that the bleed over, or the cleave damage, more or less, every attack is kind of a cleave, can maybe kill a lower health target adjacent to them, and then proc, killing spree, and then you get a second swing on them, something like that. And of course, just getting more potential kills per swing builds into rage. So that's not bad. Strike applies a 20% burning effect, which is decent. But the way champions sort of work, this ability will really sort of fall off around turn 3 of combat, because if you're playing smartly and well, your rage stacks will get going and the dots become less relevant. Plus 1 AP is always very useful, especially for champions. They have that minus 1 AP to their pool if you're using the heavy armor sigils. Plus 10 damage for basic attacks, that one's really good, and plus 6 burning damage. Again, the burning elements aren't great. So, what I want to talk about here is the cleave ability. It says adjacent units, so this does mean if you hit a unit and there's a unit behind them, you will damage them, which is great. But for enemies that are, to their left or right, generally speaking, they'll still be within melee reach of your champion, and because of killing spree, if the cleave would kill them, you would just attack them already, because killing them would trigger the free attack regardless. So, I guess it's useful for maybe trying to weaken a group, but again, because of the champion abilities, I feel like this ability isn't quite as good as it sounds on paper, not that it isn't good in general. For the second weapon, we have the Jagged Axe. This is similar to one of those one-handed swords earlier, or one-handed weapons, I should say. Melee basic attacks have X% chance to repeat against the same target. Again, this is just a sort of high roll roulette RNG weapon where if you can get a second attack for free on the same target, that's huge, especially for getting that ball rolling or for bosses to just really beat them down. Plus 18 damage against units larger than 1 tile. For the Fomorian season, that's a huge damage buff. Plus 12 bleeding damage, plus 10 damage against bleeding units, and plus 2 turn duration for bleeding. So if you're taking this, you definitely want to take the talent that makes it so your attacks cause bleed, so you're going to have to shift around some skill points a bit. And this weapon will have really high base damage, much higher than any other weapon, against those Fomorians. I'm not a really big fan of the roulette style play, the RNG. If you hit it, it's going to be amazing, but if you don't, it's kind of whatever. For general use, obviously, unless you're attacking a Beastman or a Slaughterer or a Shield Breaker or a Windmaster, that extra 18 is dead. But it is the Fomorian season, so you will get a lot of uptime on this. I think this one is probably a little better just because it has such higher base damage than the other one. But you're going to have to move some skill points around, and there's just some other current relic weapons that I just kind of like a bit more than this one. But if you had to pick between the two, I would go with the Jagged Axe. Moving on to Arcanist weapons, the staves, or the staffs. The first one is the Soul Staff. X% chance on hit to create a chain lightning effect, hitting the nearest 4 enemies for 25% weapon damage, getting a bit of AoE. 50% chance for double damage. I like how they're spreading this out to more weapons. I kind of do like that. And 100% of attack units block value, gain 2 AP for the first kill each turn, and plus 3 damage until the end of the turn for each kill. Now, this one is kind of interesting. Ultimately, the AoE effect isn't great damage, but is a good softening ability to just try and spread out that damage to as many targets as possible, so your main person can come in and just start sweeping them up. The double damage, again, sort of RNG, depends on how you kind of feel about that. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it is something nice to have. The ignore 100% of attack unit block values, though, actually not a huge fan of. A lot of Arcanists have AoE spells and abilities that just target them. It's not like a line attack, so other than their bolt attacks, most of your abilities aren't going to get blocked anyways. This may be more useful for something like Fairy Knight, because he does like melee swings, that's the main attack for him, but for most Arcanists, that ability is not going to be great. The second one, Rune of the Soul Flame, area skills deal damage per tile against units larger than one tile. So basically, the bigger the AoE it is, the more damage it's going to do against a single target. And so for someone like Morgana who has a 4x4, that's huge. And I mean, even a 3x3 is not bad. That's some decent upfront damage. And it's kind of like a big nuke, more or less, for your turn. The follow-up abilities create a wall of flame that lasts for 2 turns on a random tile occupied by an enemy. And this is after you kill 3 units. That's not very hard to do for an Arcanist. The damage on this is decent, again. Nothing like absurd, not that something you'd maybe even expect. Plus 8 damage for area attacks, which synergizes with that green ability line item at the top, and plus 4 damage until the end of the encounter for each kill. What really detracts this for me is this last ability here. Using a skill turns all remaining AP into movement AP. So you basically get 1 ability per turn, and this is counter synergistic to this general Arcanist gameplay, the Mindstorm comboing, where you're going to be spamming out a bunch of skills every round. So honestly, because of that, you do get a pretty good walloping, 1 big hit, and it's satisfying. But ultimately, I think your Arcanists contribute more with their spell spamming, putting a bunch of hexes around, a bunch of debuffs, and damage in. I think that's going to contribute more than the damage boost this staff is going to bring. Next up is the weapons for Marksman, the bows. And both of these are great. Marksman, in general, I think got some really good seasonal relics. This first one, Mark of the Stormchild, X% chance on hit to create a chain lightning, hitting the nearest 4 targets for 50% weapon damage. This one's okay. The damage isn't a whole lot, but it's nice. I mean, I honestly think this could be 100%, and it'd still be fine, because just the Marksman base damage isn't that great. But the following abilities are really good. This next one, it's similar to the Jagged Axe, where it's plus 18 damage against units larger than 1 tile, so that's primarily Fomorians. Also, Taint Hogs, I forgot to mention them earlier. And because Fomorians are the main enemy of the season, this has a very high uptime. This is a relevant ability. So it has extremely high base damage against those targets, though this doesn't seem to really transfer over to the Chain Lightning. And then just a flat plus 8 weapon damage, giving this the highest base damage of any bow. Gain 1 AP for the first kill each turn, that's okay. And then applying 15% vulnerability, just making it easier for your follow-up attacks to weaken the target further, or potentially kill them. Personally, I'm a really big fan of this bow. I think it's great. Goes a huge way to help buff up Marksman for this season, and actually make them very good and competent ranged secondary damage dealers. I do honestly think, from a damage perspective, with this weapon and some of the other relics we'll get to, Marksman can honestly compete as your ranged damage dealer against an Arcanist. They're not quite as good because their utility is a lot lower, but the gap is much closer than before. The second bow, also good. Not as much of a fan of it, but it is still good if what you see here, appeals to you. The Spire ability is basically what it is. Single target range attacks have X% chance to hit a random enemy within 5 tiles of the original target, can occur multiple times per attack. So basically, it's another roulette-style ability, except instead of doing a second attack against the same target, you have a chance to do an attack against a different target, and that has a chance to chain off of itself. So you could, in theory, shoot like 5 different targets for 1 attack, which is good for spreading out damage and weakening multiple targets for your main damage dealer. It has a killing spree ability of 3, which means you have to get 3 kills, and your attacks cost slow for the rest of the encounter. This one's okay. I mean, Marksmen are a lot better at getting kills now, so this isn't a hard ask, but it's still not exactly something you're going to be getting a whole lot. And having slow on all your shots is useful, but generally you're going to be sinking most attacks into a single target per round, so you're not going to be really spreading the slows out a whole lot, at least in terms of optimal gameplay, or, air quotes on optimal. Optimal is ultimately going to vary person to person. But the next one, it does get a Culling Strikes ability, which is good. So this does help set up the Killing Spree ability a little bit. And then units hit by the hero's attack lose their opportunity attack by 1. Again, this bow really sort of incentivizes you spreading out the damage, and a lot of it does really synergize with that Spire ability. And then plus 8 damage for units at least 6 tiles away. This one's good. It's sort of an oppression weapon is how I see it. It synergizes very well with itself to try and hit as many targets as possible and try and put some debuffing onto them with the potential to get an execution on them. It's alright. I don't find myself... I think the most hits I got off of that Spire ability is 3, and that was like once. I didn't have the highest amount of Spires yet, like I wasn't done with the end game yet, so that percent could still have gotten higher. It's good, I just definitely prefer the other option here. And I think with that I've talked enough. I think covering all of the categories of items in one video will just make the video go too long, so I think I'll stick with just the weapons for now. I'll cover armors in another one, and then the accessories in a third video. I'll make sure to release them fairly quickly, one after another, so you're not having to wait, like a week between each part. But yeah, that's sort of my takeaway for these items so far. There's definitely some that are super impactful, like the bows for the marksman, and also being pretty good for like defenders or vanguards, with the Arcanist and champion ones kind of being eh. So I hope this was useful, and I'll see you in the next part.